Patricia Kaspers. I am the editor-in-chief of West Trestle Review and the host of Silver Tongue Saturdays. Thank you for being here. Welcome, everybody. We're so happy that you're here this evening. Just a few reminders. There's a sign-up sheet for the open mic, which is not recorded. There is a bathroom out the door, past the stairs and to the right. We ask that you silence your cell phones and everybody make sure that you follow us on social media. So West Trestle on Instagram, West Trestle on Twitter, West Trestle Review on Facebook, and then our website is westtrestlreview.com, and we have a brand new issue that is launching any second. It's waiting for me to write my editor's note, which I'm going to do soon. But this evening we have Amanda Moore from San Francisco. We're so excited that she's here. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Amanda Moore. She's a poet and essayist whose work has appeared in journals and anthologies, including Best New Poets, ZZYZVA, and Mamas and Papas on the Sublime and Heartbreaking Art of Parenting. She teaches high school English and lives by the ocean in the outer Sunset neighborhood of San Francisco. And one more thing, her book is blurbed by Ocean Vuong. So her book, Requeening, blurbed by Ocean Vuong, which is so cool. Okay, here she is, Amanda Moore.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here, and thank you for that lovely introduction. I'd like to thank West Trestle Review for sponsoring this lovely space, and also just for being a wonderful journal, and the City of Auburn for giving us this beautiful space, and all of you for joining us, maybe keeping us warm wherever you are, and joining us as you start your Saturday night. I'm going to read from Requeening at first. This is my first book, although it was about 20 years in the making. The seeds of it were planted in graduate school where I studied bees, and I studied beekeeping mostly because I was trying to maybe understand Sylvia Plath's work a little more. I was at a small college in Iowa for undergrad, but I ended up at an Ivy League university for grad school and was like, I might as well take advantage of what I can do while I'm there. So I took this course in beekeeping and found a lifelong passion, not exactly for beekeeping because I'm pretty bad at it and I've killed a lot of hives, but I find it a metaphor that really guided my work over the years. I would find myself coming back to bees as a theme or as a metaphor, and when it came time a few years ago to actually figure out if in 20 years of writing I had a book in me, it became the organizing principle for Requeening. So I'm going to read a little bit from each section that sort of looks at both how I use bees in the way that maybe the bee structure leaves room for lots of non-bee poems. But I'll start with Opening the Hive, which is the first poem in the book. Late afternoon slants, illuminates the worn white husk of hive and gleams like an incubator bulb on the oval of an egg. This might have been the way I was born, to move over my mother and wash from her what was left of painful birth, her legs like the old wood cracked with a hive tool, my lips clamping and the bees burrowing into honeycomb, bathed in sweetness, a taste fresher when robbed this way. Smoke to calm, to push the heaving down to the center where the queen hides and is stroked, flanked by the upturned rumps of guard bees, wings fanning scent in warning. I open this small universe and set it in motion, a new heart ready to be fed and broken and fed again, gathering strength to reseal and take into itself what we leave behind, fingerprints through broken comb and crushed drones. This might have been the way I was born, then set to life, stolen honey clinging to light hair that covers everything new, like late afternoon sunlight, a kiss on my dented forehead, mother collapsed and emptied of poison, barbed stinger, and the baby, the jelly, the bee. The beehive is many things in this book, but one of the things it supports is sort of a domestic space. I'm pretty interested in maternal succession and just sort of the matriarchy. So I also have a series of poems in here with addresses of different homes or maybe different hives I've inhabited. I'm going to read one about my childhood home that borrows a little bit of its form from Crystal Williams' wonderful poem from her collection, Detroit as Barn. And in it, she uses this sort of anaphoric gone, gone as a chorus to talk about sort of the things, the ghosts that remain. So this house is still a ghost to me, but very present. 1729, Maple Avenue, Northbrook, Illinois. Gone the marriage, the father, gone the plum tree out front, its wild confetti, steady shade and sticky fruit blotching the sidewalk. Gone the fence we beset to paint once a year, white droplets sprinkling the hostas, black house numbers trailing down the upright pole, the birch tree and its paper scrolls, the slap of the side door on its ancient hinge, the hook and eye lock gone, the limestone gravel drive, my sisters and my sock-tender feet callousing each summer as we dared one another to race across. Gone. The garage, its detritus and stash in the rafters, gone. The radiant heat hot spots on the floor, the pull-down stairs to the attic and its boxes, old clothes and steam-weak cardboard and crumpled bags. Gone. The window unit AC that kept one bedroom frigid while the rest of the house sweltered and swooned, and the furniture we lugged from room to room, always remaking. Gone the many couches and the weights they held, the transom windows and their cranks, the big bay that once collapsed beneath a roof of half-melted snow. Gone the dishwasher, rolled out from the pantry to hook to the sink, skinnying around it on tiptoes to reach the stove. Gone the white phone, anchored to the kitchen wall, and who we called on it. Gone the extra long cord we would stretch to reach our bedrooms, the rubbery spirals pulled tight. Gone the record player and the VCR, the CDs, the DVDs, the cable box. Long gone the raspberry bush out back, my turned-up t-shirt, bottom heavy with fruit for breakfast, the jonquils and crocus that would shoulder through snow-lashed dirt come spring. Gone the creek, north branch of the Chicago River that would swell some summers, tip over its banks. Gone the plans to ford it or to build a bridge. Gone the single mother, her blue eyeshadow, silk blouses, sour smell of nylons, hot and pointy shoes. Gone her gentle nature and her rages too. Gone the grandmother, afternoon visits, her handbags and bridge mix. Gone her magic and unwanted advice, the joy, the strife, the nesting dolls we were. Gone the death that wedged us open, the green in the windows, the wild, the ordered harmony, and what we knew about the world then. Gone the shelter women give one another, rough love flooding the house and yard. I'm going to read a couple more from Requeening before I read some newer work. This book is about a year and a half old, which I think in book years is ancient. But since it's my first, it's still pretty fun to be out in the world with it. It moves through, as I said, sort of the organizing principle being the beehive. It moves through the different life cycle stages of the beehive. And so there's a lot in here about mothering, in addition to daughtering, which is sort of where the book starts, and nature. And I love reading this poem because calendula is a flower that feeds the hive. And there's nothing to do with bees in this poem necessarily, but it feels very bee present to me. Calendula. Through weed and tangle, a flower at every portal, tiny rings of fire expanding, then folding each day with sun. These blooms, their shatter of petals, needles of orange light, nothing you can suture together like a woman, like me. Single scar, stitch I took, Though we had anointed the doorway her body would make of me, we had traced it, not with blossom, but its ointment, which he, nothing else to do during the push, applied to keep me from tearing. Oh well, here in the blazing garden, lazy white moth drift, rooster crow and bluster all day long, I press a single bud in the back of my book to preserve something. Its color, maybe, its watery stalk. I pop some leaves in my mouth to taste the name. Marigold, little calendar, weatherglass clock that ticked those hours and minutes, the seconds, and me unfurling. How I worked to open. I'm taking advantage of the fact that my daughter is not here to read some of the poems that she finds the most embarrassing in the book. And we actually have, I've been talking to some former students about this recently who read it and said, what does your daughter think? We have a little bit of an agreement. When I asked her initially to read the book and excise any poems she felt were embarrassing or uncomfortable, she said, well, they're all embarrassing. And then said, please don't ask me to be your censor. The deal is I'm going to trust you and you can publish what you want. Just make me never go to your readings and never ever have to read the book. So that's where we are. That's our stance these days. So I'll read, but she works in a bookstore. And the other day she was at the register and said, oh, okay, I'm just going to look at it, and opened and read one poem and then shut it and came home and was so mad again and said, I'm never, ever going to read it. I'm never going to try it again. So I was going to read that one, but let's leave her alone. Oh, no, let's not leave her alone. In the middle of the book, while I was writing through her adolescence, I discovered a form called, I didn't discover it, I learned about a form called the haibun, which Basho, a Japanese poet, used in his really important collection. He was a haiku poet, but then he was traveling north through the interior on this very arduous walking journey, kept a journal in this haibun form, which alternates prose and poetry, or prose and a haiku. And to me, it seemed this perfect vehicle for writing about adolescence. It was this tension between prose and poetry, which was like the tension between being a woman and being a girl, or a mother and a daughter. I mean, the form itself held so much tension, allowed me to be sort of expansive with my feelings and thoughts, but then demanded a certain kind of compression at the end, or maybe throwing it up into nature. So these came very quickly and suddenly, all in one burst, and then I haven't really written one since. But I'll read a haibun. It's not almost March, but we are leaning toward March in this part of January. So I'll read the haibun written on the Ides of March. I think Patricia mentioned that I'm a high school teacher. I haven't taught Caesar in years, but this does come, it does make a reference to Caesar. So haibun on the Ides of March. The Ides of March have come, but not gone, and we are in the car on the way to school. The girl is crying again, cannot catch her breath or remember how or why, only that she is angry, and I am the problem. There are times these days I wish for something impossibly dramatic, a piano or anvil to disgorge itself from sky perhaps and land beside us, rather than continue this infinity of quarrel. Who won't listen or love? Who doesn't understand? Who can't be bothered to pick up her socks from the living room floor? Who is this child beside me, railing against each word, hurling insults until I, too, begin to weep? You are horrible, she says. I hate you. And it's not as if I held my tongue, laced more with pain than poison. We are a wild, primal thing. I want to fling myself from the car. She wants to fling me from the car, but we both need me to keep my hands on the wheel, steady in traffic, ignoring glances from drivers to our left and right. This is none of their business. Listen, I am no Caesar, need no lifelong crown. To say a girl must overthrow her mother to make her way as a woman is absurd. Yet as she winds up again in fresh attack, you never, you always, I can't stand. I wonder if she'd thrill to see me conquered on the marble stair, or even just this dashboard. so she can rise to rule her own Octavius. Crow feather and strife, so common, we learn to praise, not to bury them. All right. Hives collapse. This is something I've learned the hard way. Although I was really excited to read in the New York Times this morning, I don't know if anyone saw the article that there's now a vaccine for bees, for honeybees. So every time I think the bees have let me go and I'm not going to ever write another poem about them, they pull me back in. So now they're getting vaccinated, which in this time, since all we do is talk about vaccines, I think it's gonna happen. But there is a section in this book about collapse that deals with illness and grief. So I'll start with the poem Collapse. What do bees want? Is a question I've never asked myself or any expert. I know they need to gather pollen and nectar, need water and shelter, though they can make their own of any hollow place. But as to want, who can say? I say I need to take my vitamins, apply sunscreen, eat greens, and exercise. Want self-care, something I deserve for what I do not know. Our bodies are built to decay. I opened the hive only as often as I was told, to check brood, the health of the queen. I did not know what I was looking for, but trusted diligence would keep us from disaster. They wanted me out of their way, so I closed it all up, left them to their own desires. I don't know if you know that feeling where something is happening in your life and then everything else seems to point to it, sort of that auspiciousness. This is about one of those. I mean, I find it a lot around grief and around memory, that when something gets lodged there in the head, then everything seems to be pointing to that all the time. So this is a poem a little bit about that after loss. It's called Everything is a Sign Today. Feather in the grass, stippled and striped, hawk, I think. And then a man blocking the sidewalk, child on his back, both of them pointing binoculars toward a treetop where I know a great horned owl nests, though I've never seen it. All these birds, creatures I might never have known had I not spent my childhood filling her feeders, naming each genus from our perch at her kitchen table. A falcon swoops down beside me on the path, gripping some rodent in its talons, twisting the body to kill. Like the time a heron a few feet from our picnic blanket plucked a whole mouse from its burrow and swept away. She had been delighted, said we too should grab something special of our own that day. Turning toward home, I bend to collect a wrinkled postcard at the curb, an advertisement for the Monet exhibit. How I loved those paintings when I was younger, all of them nearly the same. Haystack, haystack, haystack. The only difference, the season and time of day, which is to say, they are like this grief these months later, all the same, but for the light. I think that Monet reference is also a really regional reference. I grew up in Chicago, near the Chicago Art Museum, or Art Institute, where all of the Monets are the haystacks. But out here on the West Coast, a lot of the Monets are the lilies, the water lilies. So I don't know if that always lands so well out here. I'm going to, in the sort of spirit of open mic and the spirit of moving on, I'm going to put Requeening aside. It is getting a little long in the tooth, and I'm starting to think about what might be next. I hope the next book doesn't take 20 years to gather its steam. As Patricia mentioned in my intro, I live in San Francisco near Ocean Beach, and I live just 4 blocks from the beach, and I spend a lot of time in the water and thinking about the water. And while I refuse to write another book entirely themed, so it won't be guided in the same way metaphorically by the water finds its way into almost all these new poems. So here's a newer one called Lines Toward Grace, which is for my friend Greg. In his letter, Greg asks if I say a prayer before I go out on the water, but each morning I am silent at the ocean's edge. I run into breakers over mucky sand where mole crabs poke at my soles before burying themselves, creatures more aware of harm and threat than I am. Terns and gulls twirl and dive, and I spot a long dorsal, humpback, its pluming exhalation and wait, its fluke. I slip beneath the surface to try to hear its benthic song. If I ask Greg how to pray, he will tell me to listen to some inner voice. He does not know death is my only guide. In the water, I don't hear the whale, but know it swims beneath me by the vortex of birds above. I am half pressed to sea, half open to sky. Greg goes by eagle inside. Creature of air, he is tethered on earth. At the end of each letter, he draws a wing like a wish. His concern for the life I cast into ocean is as lucky as swimming with the whale, or my whole existence. Nothing I deserve, but mine to take. My writing process has really changed now that I live near the water. And, well, not right now, because right now the storms have the waves about 25 feet high, and it's a little mess out there. But often in the morning I wake up and I'll read a little something, or I'll write a little something before I go out and I do a little surfing. And that's become my writing process, because there's a lot of time to think when you're paddling and waiting for waves. And it becomes this way, I start repeating lines. And so this poem, which I'm going to try to do from memory, I think I can almost do all of it, because that's how it was composed. So I would be out there working on it, paddling away, and then I'd come home and write it down. So we'll see how I do. I'm going to lay it out just in case I need. I get a little nervous sometimes. It's called Despite. Mornings, I try to open like a pupil, wide in the dark and ready to let the whole world enter me as light. I can love it all, I tell myself. The man who sleeps beside me, beneath his watchful cat. The cat, though she annoys me. Early joggers, dog walkers. The person who will hand my coffee hours from now across a counter, forgetting I don't want room for cream. And maybe even that little jerk who broke my daughter's heart. I hear her crying through the wall and want to go to her as I once did, tears and snot on my shoulder as we rock and sway toward comfort. I move instead in stealth downstairs so she doesn't know I've heard. Even if she wanted to and begged, I wouldn't let her join my morning's dark adventures in the surf. Hard enough to keep track of my friend, and I don't mistake his heart, his life, for mine, the way I do with hers. Still, I watch his shadow form against the waves as he does mine, a pact we've made to minimize our risk. Start together, yet as we cleave, like that Thursday when, pulled out by Rip, I didn't think I'd make it back to shore. Held down, held under, candled by wave and almost snuffed. I didn't know until I saw him see me I'd be safe. Then the ocean gave me back my breath, which I drew in more deeply, more beloved than I did before. This is what I want to take, like an unblemished sand dollar, home to my daughter, where she sits in her pain, as in a too-hot bath. We know water doesn't hold its heat for long, but that doesn't keep the first touch from burning. I know today can't hold this dawn light, the pink and orange of it, the blue-black roiling, but it doesn't keep me from watching, from taking all its light in. The nice thing is, you have no idea if I messed up. because this poem doesn't exist anywhere but here. I think I might have gotten it. I don't even know if I missed it, which is sort of awesome. All right, so in the spirit of an open mic and of, sort of being with other writers and being, we're all anticipating West Trestle Review's new release, like thinking a little bit about writing. Last summer, I was reading Mark Wunderlich's book, God of Nothing, and he has this poem that is called Wunderlich, and it's a poem about his last name, and he explores the etymology of his last name, and he explores some of the implications of his name. It's both invented and actual, and it inspired me to write a poem about my own last name. And this is also because at the same time I was reading, there's a great poem by Dean Rader that was based on a poem by Ocean Vuong, that was based on a poem by Roger Reeves, that I think even has a thread that winds further back about learning to love oneself. And this is what I love so much about what's happening in contemporary poetry right now. There's so much inspiration that we're getting from one another, so many threads, or we're writing after or with other people, and sort of passing that along. So this is the poem, as much as it is an invitation for all of us to go home tonight and write poems about our last names and maybe investigate them a little and try to figure out what's at work in those last names. So this is More, after Wunderlich by Mark Wunderlich. More. Myriad. Mutt of misbegotten. The name mixture, an unraveled skein. There is no single source, but plunder. From Omorda or Omor, excess, ode to also. The name can mean stately and noble, area of uncultivated land, heathy mountain. More, a collector of manorial rents on the Isle of Man. See, we're takers. More from more, an extra O peeking, a newly opened eye to indicate son of. But what folly, the name never mine to pass along. My daughter is no more, but I didn't have to tuck my name in hers to leave her with its gifts. More for rulers of country Laos, which may also be why she's rebellious, like those who cast off the cloak of English law, as she does my protection. More an open land or bog, fragile and easily bruised, and we are bog dwellers, revelers in the heart's wet marsh and sludge. Impatient, I taught my daughter to sign more when she was just a baby, when our mother tongue was moved and it moved through our bodies as scent and cry and sigh and leak. No words, but I tried to give her language. I should have listened better. The name means perpetually unsatisfied. No, it means one who wants too much. It means one not sated, maybe brusque and driven, long-haired, a bad sleeper, pigeon, a hoarder, a prowl. From Old Norse, Mur, meaning ocean, meaning sea, meaning a woman who wakes before dawn to beat even the sun down to shore. It may come from Scottish, Clan Muir. I want no clan, and leave behind the Muir, though it invites me to wild and wood. We have lost moors to Nagers and Ipjons and Nelsons and Smith, but gained a Moshrush and a Reed. From Maurus, a Latin name, first meaning dark-skinned, from Old French, more meaning more like a Berber, a colloquial nickname for a person of dark complexion. Not me. My name could be another stolen thing on which I've built my life. Our bodies are our gardens in which our names are gardeners, meaning we reap what we sow, meaning I know violence in my name, though I can't give it back. It is my tether, my anchor, my bind, my ship in the slip, my wasteland, my scrubby fen, my picket. I will not survive it. I am the final bearer, end of the line, last hands to hold its measure, heavier than it seems, dense as if of lead or stone, mercury, a drop of quicksilver, dangerous and darting on my palm, splintering, if I outlive my father, if. I'm the last bead on the chain, the final snag of thread, no more in the tree, no more umbilical limb. So let me leave here with more to do, unsatisfied and hungry. Let more be the last word on my tongue. So I want to thank you all so much. I look forward to hearing your poems at the open mic and to reading your poems about your last names. Thank you so much.
Oh, we have the question and answer period. I'm sorry.
I totally forgot. I knew that. I just, am often excited to make a fast getaway.
Well, since you read a long poem, I'm wondering if you could talk about the process of writing a long poem.
Those are short compared to some of the really long poems I've written but did not publish. When I was in graduate school, I actually took a class in the American long poem and was really interested in how the syllabus excluded a lot of women. I mean, there are just not a lot of women who are writing book-length poems or long poems. And so I tried to do that. That was 20 years ago. There's a reason it's not in the book, because it was complicated, and I think I wrote it by section. So I don't think of those in that same multi-page long poem, but I think I tend to write long. I think my process is one of, I keep a really diligent notebook, and as I said, I'm writing pretty much every day in that notebook, and so my drafts tend to be very long. I think it's really challenging and difficult to write short poems. That's the Achilles heel. When this book started sort of coming together for me, that haibun and that turn to the haibun was also concurrent with a turn toward the lyric essay. I think I just have more words as I'm growing older, so I just have more words, and so those poems kind of come from that. I think they're better a little bit, with this surfing or this water writing that I'm doing right now, I'm hearing more rhythm. I think that's what's making those long poems easier to not want to just pare away. I think in my younger days, I would just prune them until they were almost nothing. And I don't know if that's really answering your question, but I don't know. It's a mystery to me. I don't ever set out with the idea of writing long poems. That the 1729 Maple Avenue poem, which is the second poem I read, the form of that poem in the book, if you look at it, it's in tercets that are unpunctuated. And I used that form to kind of wrestle that poem into shape after reading Ed Hirsch's book, Gabriel, which is a 76-page poem in unpunctuated tercets all about his son. And when I read him talking about it, he was talking about how that tercet is almost like a spiral staircase, and you're constantly like leaving yourself and coming back, and it opens up all of this syntactical possibility. And all of a sudden, when I saw it from that point of view, I saw, oh, this would be a perfect vehicle for a longer poem. So those longer poems, I think, on the page take on different shapes. Some of my long poems are really skinny. I worked with Archie Ammons a long time ago, and he would write on ticker tape.
Oh, yeah.
And that's a good way to get really long poems out. So if you give yourself, like, I have to type until that thing happens. Yeah. Thank you. That's a great poem. Or great question.
Also, I'm wondering have you had people responding to your poems about motherhood? Like, what has the reader response been?
Yeah, I don't think of these poems as being taboo breaking, but I think they are. I think we don't talk about how horrible mothering is so much, and it's also lovely. It's one of the greatest things I've done, and it's grueling, and my child can be horrible sometimes. So I think being able to say that out loud and hold it. It's Rilke who says we can't, write. I can't remember the word that his translator uses, but basically what he's saying is we can't lament something if we don't deeply, deeply love it. And so I think for whatever reason that's resounding with moms. I hear from moms all the time, like, oh my gosh, you put into words so many of the things that I feel, but I can also feel your love for even the difficult moments. I had someone just send me an email whose child just got into college, and she titled it, "She Made Her Life a Leaving," which is a line from one of my poems. And I was so touched that was something that she was thinking as she was going through this big transition. So I think some of the harder moments resonate. And then I get a lot of questions from moms who want to know about how ethical what I did was. Is it ethical to write a book about your child, or is it an ethical decision to publish poems about your child. And you know, I hide behind the idea that the speaker is really a lot like me, but isn't always me. And a discussion I had to have with my daughter really early on was that, you know, it might be the germ of the story or the seed of the story, but the story takes over, or the poem takes over, and so it's the image of us, but not us. And I was very inspired when this was coming out, and I was really talking to other moms about whether this was okay. I reread Sally Mann's book, her autobiography, Hold On or Hold Tight, and she's someone who made all of these photos in the 90s with her children as the subject, and it was really controversial when it came out. So I was reading that section where she was sort of talking about how she and her children processed that, and how they really thought what they were making was art, and they saw it that way as separate from themselves. And I was taking all of this solace in that, and I told my friend who's the art teacher at the school, and she said, well, I mean, yes, and those children had very complicated lives when they grew up. You might want to do a little more research before you lean on that heavily. So the other reaction, in addition to moms just being sort of grateful for some of those poems, moms wondering how much privacy I've invaded. So those have been some tough conversations, but some good conversations too.
Yeah. So you sort of answered this, but I'm wondering, how do you find yourself circling back to poems that are like the poems from, like, do you find yourself circling back to similar themes that are coming in? Yeah.
I want to believe we're all as obsessive as I am. I mean, I think we're all obsessive. I've talked to other poets about these obsessive things, and you know, if there's anything that happens right now in books and in publishing, I think sometimes we edit out the obsessiveness, but obsession is really good. We should be obsessive, because I think you can't get through all of it. I mean, bees as a metaphor is huge. I find myself wanting to reapproach it and come back to it again, and everything is always changing. Light is always changing, wind and sound. And one thing I think of as a high school teacher, there are some books that I have taught 20 times or 13 times. And I was reading The Great Gatsby last spring, and it's a totally different book to me in my late 40s than it was the first time I was teaching it in my 20s. And I think that that's true for us as writers, that we can come back to those same subjects and those same topics and those same forms and be finding new angles that we hadn't thought of before and new ideas in them. So yeah, I think I'm super obsessive. And I'm trying not to make the ocean the only thing I write about. And there was a period in the pandemic where I was annoying. All I could talk about was Dawn, and my daughter will still tell you she won't go for beach walks with me because the whole time I'm like, look at that wave, that one's feeling right, and she thinks I'm redundant. But I think there's really something important for all of us into like going into that obsessive place and exhausting it. And you know, I see a huge difference between writing and publishing. I might write this bee vaccine poem. Who knows what will happen? It might just need to get written. I have so many poems that I write and that don't come into the world that are about sort of itching that obsessive scratching that obsessive itch.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting, beekeeping as a metaphor for parenting. And with beekeeping, it's very process-driven. You can expect certain results when you do certain things in the hive. The bees just always act that way, and parenting isn't that way at all. And I'm wondering how you hold those two concepts, or if you address that in your book.
I don't address it, but I will tell you, I think I have it. So the last piece in the book is a long lyric essay or poem-y essay about being bad at beekeeping. So when you say like it's process-oriented, intellectually I know it's process-oriented, and that might be why I can't keep a hive alive, is that it seems to me very creative. And I'm just going to read a little beginning of this essay because it might tell you why, like, my wacky approach to beekeeping might be why, like, the parenting is also, you know, we were sharing a story before this started about college search because I'm on that and not doing it. I don't know. I don't know the processes. So yeah, there's a certain amount of input to children and to bees that there are so many factors. I can't control the wind near my hives. I can't control the mites. I can't control the varroa disease. There's so much I can't control, just as I can't control with parenting. But so I can't remember where this happens, but like I was a terrible beekeeper. I want to, so this is about having a new hive. There's an artist who puts broken figurines in hives, and then the bees pull honeycomb to like complete them, and it's this collaboration. So I was talking about how I wanted to do this, and I said, I want to ask my bees to fix the handmade bowl I splintered, but I've been afraid to crack the lid since they arrived and I installed the nucleus. I can't even bring myself to remove the queen cage I left dangling between the frames once the bees chewed through the sugar plug to extract her. That alien piece of furniture is probably messing up what's called bee space in the new architecture of the hive, where workers should be pulling combs straight and making an order of things. One morning, I did try to get in there and have a look. It didn't go well. When I called my sister later to confess what a bad beekeeper I am, she just said, wait, tell me again what you were wearing? Because I had only thought to open things up and finally get the cage out when I came back from surfing, still in my wetsuit, and realized that even though it's black and you're not supposed to wear dark clothing when tending a hive lest the bees think you're a bear, they probably can't sting through neoprene. Without much thought, I threw on my veil and went to the hive. I don't usually smoke my bees and couldn't find gloves, but I forged ahead anyway, inspired by an essay by a beekeeping poet I adore who says he goes to his bees in thin-soled shoes, gloveless and shirtless, vulnerable so that they know he isn't there to harm them. So I think that might be my parenting too, is that like I'm like, oh, I read an essay, or right now I'm here and I'm gonna do this thing, and I make so many mistakes in the same way. So actually maybe it's the exact same thing. And maybe every bee poem in here is actually a parenting poem, and maybe every parenting poem is actually a bee poem, and it's taken me a year and a half of running around with this book, and I just learned something, so thank you for that question. But the short answer is we can't control bees or children, and it's really hard. I gotta pick a better hobby where I'm like in control and can predict the outcome. It's truly.
One more question.
Okay.
I love that you shared that it took you 20 years to get your book. It took me 20 years to get my book published. And so I wonder if you would talk a little bit about your process of getting your book published.
Yeah, so I think, over the years, so I wrote for 20 years and didn't, I'd have these fits and starts where I'd start to publish and think about a book and not know what to do with it. And as I said, I was getting annoyed with poetry, or I was really feeling stalled out with it, and I started doing nonfiction and writing these essays, and I went to a summer program finally, and I was like, help me with this essay, and I was talking to a poet, a lovely poet, and I said, I have 20 years of poems, and when I look at it, I don't know if I have one book or two books or 14 chapbooks, and she said, well, you have no book as far as I can tell, so let's get it together. And she gave me this idea of like finding a structure to sort so that I could go through 20 years of poems and put together a manuscript. And once that key came together, it was like all of this. And I had been submitting some chapbooks and getting lots of finalist nods, but nothing was coming together. Man, that was the summer of 2019. She gave me that structure. I spent the rest of the summer before going back to the fall working it. Like, here are my 5 sections. Here's what the beehive's doing. Cutting poems, all the love poems. If you read this book, you'll think I don't love my husband. Like, I cut so many things, and I got it into shape, and I just knew. When I finished it, I was like, oh, this is it. And so I started submitting it in the fall, and I submitted it to the National Poetry Series, among a lot of other things. And that deadline is March. I remember that. And, that was as the world shut down, 2020. And so, all summer long, and had a couple of manuscripts out there. And I got an email from National Poetry Series saying you're a finalist. And there was something, and I swear I am not a vain person, but there was something inside where I was like, this could actually happen. I felt confident enough in the manuscript after years of no confidence. And so I pulled my manuscript from a bunch of places, including a press that called me right away and said, don't pull your manuscript. And I had a real moment where I was like, here's, you know nothing about the National Poetry Series. You don't know who the judges are. You know nothing, and here's this maybe. And then here was someone saying, like, don't pull it. I can't tell you, but you really don't want to pull your manuscript. And I had to sit with myself and think, after 20 years, what do I want to take a big chance? Or do I want, like a sure thing? And it was sort of like gambling. And I did it. I was like, just let me. And in fact, it was such a back and forth that I finally had to confess my hubris, which I didn't want to do at first. I was like, oh, no, don't worry, I'll submit next year. And the editor sort of pushed me a little, and then I said, listen, here's what the deal is. And I think, she kind of was like, all right, good luck. Good luck with that. And then I was teaching online in my kitchen. My daughter was learning in her bedroom. My husband was working right below us, and I remember getting this phone call again and again from a number that I didn't know. And then I finally listened to the message, and it was, hi, Amanda, this is Ocean Vuong. And it just, like in those moments, I was like, oh, I know. And it was such a, I feel a little hubristic even talking about this, but I think after 20 years of writing, it was a perfect way for it to happen. And I don't know now, people ask a lot about what the second book will be. I clearly don't know how to write a book. I know how to write hundreds of poems and organize them into a book. I don't know if I know how to write a book from scratch. So we'll see what the next process will be like. Yeah, but it was a pretty, awesome process for a debut book, because you get your debut book and you have to really shill it and work hard, and poetry it's a tough gig, and so this was like a real boon and a real lucky ride. And I actually really love that this is sort of, the end of the trail is near, and I'm grateful that I get to be here with it. So thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Comment online, a couple comments from online. Fabulous work. I think it was the second poem. They're stunned by the repetitive gone.
Which I stole from Crystal Williams. So again, I want to say that, but the anaphora is one of my favorite ways, and this goes back to that first question about the long poem, to stitch something together and bring that together. But thank you.
And then extraordinary observations in the poem about the birds.
Oh, thanks. Again, auspiciousness. Those birds found me that day. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
All right, so before we head out, I just want to remind you all that we do have more readings coming up. Let me see. We have, I didn't write down who's coming in February. Who is coming in February? I'm sorry, I can't remember, but she's fabulous, and you're going to love her. Okay, and then in March we have Carla Brundage, who is a Bay Area poet. And in April we have Joyce Young, who is from Oakland. And then in May we have Deborah Major. So I hope that you will all follow us along on social media and check our website, westtresselreview.com, and come to Auburn. It's a fabulous place to visit. So thank you so much. And we are going to have the open mic, and we're going to end the recording before the open mic. So take care. See you next time.